few minutes to sit down.
Great.
All righty. We are starting, we're recording. Excuse me. Welcome everybody. Have a virtual seat as we get ready to begin. Like 15 more seconds and then we can get started. Okay, I will begin. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to the spring 2023 Sara Little Turnbull Visiting Designer Lecture Series. This is the fourth talk in the series this semester. In this series, we talk to various luminaries in the world of art, activism, the sciences, and today we're going to be talking to a designer, which is great because this is a design lecture series. This semester, we've been focusing on design specifically through a queer lens, that is queer representation into the design industry, how the products of that design industry include queer and non-binary voices, users, audiences. This series is also running concurrently with the Lehman College Art Gallery's current exhibition, Queer Love, Affection and Romance in Contemporary Art, which presents paintings and photographs that illuminate both individual and universal stories of vulnerability, tenderness, and desire in the LGBTQIA+ community. It opened on Valentine's Day, and it will close on April 28th. This lecture series is also a component of an interdisciplinary LGBTQIA+ design course that some of the students are here right now, that focuses on LGBTQIA issues in design. These students are here today, and they'll be interacting hopefully through the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen. We love to hear questions from our students. It's also open to the public, this series, this talk. So anyone who's here listening is welcome to ask a question in the Q&A, and we love to answer questions. We love to feel smart and, you know, answer interesting questions. So I'd like to introduce our guest. Our guest is Bibbo. Her professional work is rooted with social and reproductive justice spaces through the mediums of photography, film, and design. She is currently an art director for Planned Parenthood, navigating access to abortion in a post-Roe landscape. Prior to that, she served as creative director with Progress Now Colorado, the state's largest multi-issue progressive organization. Ali believes that visual storytelling is a tool that can be harnessed for lasting political change, and that the creation of compelling, authentic, and relevant content is crucial for helping people understand our world in new ways. She was born in New England, raised in the Rockies, and currently resides in New Orleans with her partner and 2 kitties and some bad weather, I hear. So if at any point we lose Ali due to weather, don't freak out. That's what happened, and we'll try to get her back on. So welcome, Ali. Thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I was so thrilled when I heard about this lecture, and just it brings together two things that I really focus on in my work and my life. Love exploring queerness and advocacy through the lens of storytelling and design. And like you said, I've worked probably for the past 7 or 8 years in these spaces through video and photo and design, and just really excited to have this conversation.
Great, thank you. So you have some stuff to show us.
I do. Let me pull it up.
Yeah.
And I'll just echo that. Also love the idea of folks interacting as we're speaking. So if you have any questions about specific pieces of work, please just feel free to stop us and ask, and happy to discuss anything at length as well.
Yeah. And if they don't, I will, because I
great.
love to talk. So
Don't
worry.
Cool. So I'll start off with just going through a piece that I worked on most recently. And this was for World AIDS Day. And I worked with an organization, I worked with 5280 Fast Track Cities and Denver Health Medical. And it was an initiative that was part of a global effort to reach 95, 95, 95 by 2030. So 95% of people living with HIV have been diagnosed, are aware of their status, and engaged in care that have suppressed viral loads. And so I've included some folks that we photographed. And so the way that we sort of approached this was in combination with a design piece that is going, it was a website rebuild. There were posters going all over the city. And also it was a longer form documentary video that was filmed for about 4 different folks in different stages of their journey. All of these 4 individuals are currently living with HIV, and some of them have lived, for 30 years plus with HIV, and one of them was diagnosed 3 years ago. And so the group approached me and was initially wanting to do a little bit of storytelling around these individuals. And I suggested that we capture more intimate portraits in their homes with their families. The goal of the campaign was just really to destigmatize HIV and show these individuals as just full, vibrant people who live just full, vibrant lives. And so I'll go through a couple of these. So this is Rika. She's a mom, a partner, a community organizer, an artist, and 33 years HIV positive. This is her partner and her dog. And she did have kiddos, but out of respect for some privacy, I did leave out some of the kiddos. This is Calvin. He's a community leader, an organizer, a musician, and one of the first presidents of San Francisco's Pride Parade, HIV positive for over 30 years. I felt like in this person's presence, I was just in the presence of history and such joy. He was so vivacious, and yeah, he was absolutely wonderful. It's Calvin again. This is Andy. He's a dad, partner, positive for 3.5 years, and has a young son. Loves the abs, as you can see. And this is Miguel, community member, student, 14 years, HIV positive. And so this piece really touched me for a couple of different reasons. And maybe we could talk about upfront, because I know this is a design course. And I think making that connection between design and visual storytelling and photography is really important. And I'm curious how folks on the call feel about it, but I have just always been drawn to visual storytelling as a medium. And if we're looking at storytelling as how do we create a container to design for, so folks can, if we're seeing design as just a way to communicate a message to an audience, how do we create a container around that so folks can really see and focus in on this part of people's lives, or this message that we're trying to convey, or just a little snippet of information that makes them feel an emotion, something or other, and drive them to action. And so I think that is what is really powerful about combining photography into this.
Yeah, I see. Okay, so let me stop you there. So I totally agree. And when my very first thing that I ever did when I knew I wanted to be an artist was photography, and I was 8. My dad gave me a camera, and I didn't know what I was taking pictures of. I didn't care. I just knew I wanted to take pictures. Didn't know why. And then later on, I got into other media, and eventually now I'm into traditional graphic design, layout, print, and web design, interface design. I'm into documentary film. I'm definitely into photography. It's why I love your work, especially. It kind of resonates with me. And I'm also into physical media, like fabric and fiber and everything. In other words, I'm sort of agnostic when it comes to media, because it doesn't matter to me as long as they're all in the service of this thing that I want to do that's inside me. And I realized, I think you have, that it's storytelling. That's what I want to do, right? I also like to write, I'm never going to finish a novel, but I'm constantly working on them. It's I'm one of those people. And I also think gaming is storytelling, right? We were talking to a game designer in the first part of the series, And it was clear that games were kind of like stories, right? They were interactive stories, and the players had a hand in the outcome, but they're still stories. So I remember, that I feel like there's a lot of pushback about that. I think when people think design, they don't think storytelling. They think somebody pushes pixels around and works with type and images and then puts it in a book or on a website, and that's the end of it. And I was just wondering if you could comment on that. Like, how is design storytelling? How are they the same thing? Is it true? I mean, are they the same thing? Do they overlap?
I think there's definitely overlap, and I think it depends how broad you're looking at design as a medium. And I think, the first thing I'll say, I have a friend who's an artist and also a textile artist, also a writer and a poet and a designer, and she does all these things. And even I'll comment on the textile stuff. Even being down here in New Orleans for Mardi Gras, I'd just learned to sew, and that feels like an art form.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
It is, and it feels like such an expressive art form. And a lot of those different mediums, especially photography, especially dance, music, I think really can inform the other art that you're working on and the other design that you're working on. And I think, when we hit roadblocks and when we hit pieces where we're like, oh, I'm just, I don't know what typeface to use, or I'm not feeling the lighting in this, or I don't know how to capture this feeling or this moment. I think leaning into another form of design, another medium, has been really helpful for me in honing both of those skill sets. So I mean, in that sense, I think it's absolutely an art form, and I think it's absolutely design in a way, because, if we're talking about design as a medium to communicate a message at its most basic, to distill information and communicate a message to the public or to your audience, I think this absolutely fits into that.
And then second follow-up question, what is the story here? Like, in this series, how would you sort of characterize what the story is that you're trying to tell with these sequence of these photographs?
Yeah, and so I'll say I just pulled, my 3 favorites from each person. There was a series of like 5 to 7 for each person, and you can see a little bit better in the larger series, but we were really trying to capture them. Some of these had to be done in an afternoon, but I think if I was to do this on a larger scale, the goal would be to really try to capture them in their day-to-day lives. Like with Calvin, Calvin is a deeply spiritual person. He brought out, he has a number of spiritual practices. He has an altar for a lot of his family members. He's a musician, and some of those photos just really captured him in those tender moments that bring out our humanity. And I think with HIV specifically, I know it's changed specifically within the queer community in recent years, which I think we're all so grateful for. But I think, when I was meeting with Andy, who's in a heterosexual relationship, who was just recently diagnosed, he told me about this kind of panic that he was feeling. He grew up in the 80s, and it was really really different back then. And I think the reason why it is like that is because there's such stigma surrounding this work. And I think stigma breaks when we tell the human stories behind, behind just an HIV diagnosis.
I grew up in the 80s. I know none of our students did. It's just like, I wish they did, because I feel out of touch with our students often, but I grew up in the 80s, and I remember being terrified. Right. And this is, it's not just about stigma. It was about the fear of death and dying. I mean, these are things for like I don't know, maybe 6, 7-year-old are really big topics to have to deal with. And all the way up until the 90s, this was the case. And so I come into this like already knowing the story of HIV and AIDS as being one of terror, frankly. Right. And one that I think the Reagan administration and others sort of foisted on the gay and community, right, early on, that it was a gay problem and therefore not really a problem, right? It was an aberrant thing, right? I think that's the way it was characterized, and a lot of people died because of that, right? So it was an epidemic at that point. It's no longer an epidemic, if I'm not mistaken, right? I mean, it's under control, it's contained, and with proper treatment, most people lead normal lives. Then we come into the exposition, in other words, of the story is terror. And then we come into your photographs, and we don't see terror. We see the part of the story, like the victory, like we see almost like the resolution of the story, that this is the story of the future, right? This is like the, how we're going to continue and end the story of HIV, and it's a positive one. And I think in terms of storytelling, I think it's beautifully done. It was like really elegantly executed. And I just want to point that out, that like that strategy is really useful for a lot of different things, not just the HIV community, not just LGBTQIA plus issues. That strategy of humanizing and showing like heroic, like despite all the odds, like heroically just living as being radical. There's a comment here just in the Q&A. Presenting drag shows as an art form, for example, performance art is an important counter to recent laws, like such as in Tennessee. That's the most, and I think Florida too, that have been put in place, right? So like now a drag show is suddenly this radically heroic act, right? Whereas like maybe a few years ago it wasn't. Now it's like heroic, and I just think that that's amazing too. So.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I appreciate you adding the context around, it wasn't just stigma in the 80s.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't.
Terrifying thing. And this is absolutely a new age. So respect and honor that. And love the comment about the drag show as well. I think, unfortunately, I feel like we're just seeing more and more of that. And my partner woke me up with that this morning, and it's just terrifying. And I feel like the queer community has had unfortunately, like decades and decades of practice using different forms of joy and dance and performance as resistance.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah. So sorry to interrupt you, though. Continue.
No, yeah. Okay, so I can show you this this next one, and we were having a little trouble with the audio, so let's see if the audio goes through.
Yeah, I'm not hearing. No, I'm not hearing it.
No, you're not. Okay.
But the visuals are beautiful though, and I'm interested in hearing.
So what I'll do is I'll just let it run, and we can talk it through. And if folks are interested in taking a look later, we can send that along. But this is an organization I still currently am honored to work with, called Soul to Soul Sisters. And they are a grassroots faith-oriented racial justice nonprofit based in Denver. And they focus on Black women-led programs centered around Black women's healing, health, reparations, reproductive justice, and work through a womanist creative thought and theology. And so this piece was so refreshing to me and such a joy to make. I think coming off of my first stint at Planned Parenthood years and years ago, I think when we were still using, and please someone absolutely raise a hand if you want me to go into this a little more deeply, but when we were still using choice-centered reproductive rights framework and messaging. And I think this was really refreshing because it is a Black woman-led initiative that is using a lot of reproductive justice framing. And so I guess just real quick, reproductive rights is more of what you hear from a Planned Parenthood. It's my body, my choice. Reproductive justice seeks to center the experiences of those most deeply impacted, and really seeks to say, okay, it's not necessarily a choice. Let's reframe it as a decision. Let's reframe it as what is, do you have the resources in your community to raise healthy families? Do you have access and knowledge of birth control methods? Are you growing up in an area where you have healthcare and can keep your family safe and healthy? Are you growing up in an area where your child can grow up not next to a highway? So there's climate justice involved and environmental justice involved as well. And so yeah, that's just kind of a quick breakdown there. But this piece, we interviewed folks. Let me see if I can extend so y'all can see the full video, and I'm not sure that I can. So we interviewed 3 different women who had abortions and were at different points of their journey, and they were really vulnerable, and it was a little bit raw to hear and really honest. And I think this actually exists in a slight bit of contrast to the piece that I showed earlier, which was really a lot of joy and joy around, being a survivor, if I can say that, of HIV. And here it was I think in the repro rights world, we hear a lot of, if you regret this, or if you're bringing faith into this process, there's kind of no place for this in the discourse, or there's no nuance here. There's no ability to feel, any form of guilt or any form of any complex emotions. And what I love about this is there's a lot of complexity and a lot of richness here. And I think it just honors different experiences.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because we were talking about how reproductive rights used to be choice centered, right? And that has since been pretty successfully co-opted, the idea of choice, by the right to for a lot of other reasons. In fact, that same terminology, my body, my choice, as applied to masking and vaccines, for example. Right. So it's like the inverse. They kind of like successfully inverted it. And you could talk to one person who says, it's my body, my choice. If I don't want to use a vaccine or wear a mask, I shouldn't have to. And ask that same person a minute later about abortion rights, access to abortion, and they can say, it's not my body, my choice. It's, there's a baby involved, right? So it's cognitive dissonance at like the highest level. But really, ultimately, the problem is that this idea of choice has been effectively obviated. Like, it doesn't even matter anymore. So, because you could say whatever you want, it's just rhetoric. But this is different, right? Like, this actually it doesn't complicate it. It makes it a little bit easier to digest the fact that choice is not an easy choice. It's not a binary choice. It's a very complex choice with regret and empowerment involved. And it's not something, and ultimately that it's that woman's choice, right? All those feelings are centered on the woman who has to have this baby or not. And I feel like that kind of nuance, although often lost on the general public, in this particular issue, like the issue of abortion rights nationally, it's not lost on most Americans, which I think is really refreshing. And it gives me hope. So
yeah, I mean, most Americans do support abortion on some level, and I think we could throw out numbers, but I think what we are seeing, the majority do support being able to have control and autonomy over your own body. And I think I will say, oftentimes there is no regret. Oftentimes it is an easy choice, and sometimes it's not. And I think there just should be room. There should be room for both of that. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, at the end of the day, beliefs and values are so complex. The point is that you are not. We need to trust women, and trust not just women, but people who have abortions, and queer people and trans folks and non-binary folks who have abortions, to be able to make the best decision that they can for themselves in their own in their own lives. And that's really the only, and also culturally and structurally set up the resources to give people the access to be able to do so.
Which is really more of like a libertarian viewpoint. If you look at it, it's like everyone should be able to make those decisions for themselves. The government shouldn't have any control over it at all, which is like traditionally the purview, or the argument you would hear on the right for a lot of stuff. Again, it's been inverted, and now it appears on the left for this particular issue. I just find that really, it's at once distressing and also fascinating. My question from a design perspective would be, Americans, in our country, abortion was actually legal, or actually illegal at the federal level, and through many states, as was birth control, right? Until the 60s, and then Roe was in 73, right? So, and at that point, of course, it was federally recognized as no state or legislation could make a law against it, right? Until it was overturned a few years ago. So what changed people's minds? Like, why did we go from a country who, was relatively okay with having abortions be illegal, and therefore, were anyone to attain, and it would have to be an unsafe abortion, right? And also birth control illegal. Where do we go from that period in the 60s and early 70s to now, where public opinion is in favor of those things, even while they're being outlawed? Was that due to messaging? Was that due to campaigns? And design? Like what role did artists and designers play in that, if any?
That's a really interesting question. And I'm not sure what role, I think designers and artists always have a role to play to tell the stories of folks most impacted and to distill the information in a way that, I'm a designer for Planned Parenthood. And I will say a little disclaimer before I forget. Legally, I'm not speaking on behalf of Planned Parenthood. I'm speaking as myself, but I've been a designer on and off for Planned Parenthood for a few years now. And a huge portion of what we do is brand awareness, and is getting people comfortable with the brand and getting people to trust the brand of, that you can come to Planned Parenthood for non-judgmental, open-minded, medically accurate sexual healthcare, questions about sexuality, questions about pregnancy, questions about abortion, questions about queerness. I mean, a lot of people get their first queer sex ed at Planned Parenthood, and a lot of work that we do, which we can get into a little bit later, when we're thinking about, okay, why is abortion connected to, why is this issue of abortion or reproductive rights connected to queerness and LGBTQ activism? And I think it absolutely, the work that we do in repro rights organizations is so deeply, it reaches out through queer communities to the point where they almost overlap. I mean, like I said, the first sex ed folks were getting a lot of times was with Planned Parenthood. And
right.
yeah, we can get into that a little bit later on.
Yeah, of course.
Derail, but so I think the work that I guess I feel like I'm doing now is telling these stories so more folks can understand and really break the image that we have of, what does someone look like who gets an abortion, right? Mm-hmm. And we have these just awful stereotypes, and also any reason is valid to have control over your own body, any reason at all. There's no reason that's more or less valid than any other. So I'll just name that, but I think it's so important that people hear what folks are going through in this process. And I think that role is with artists and designers.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
It does. It's branding reproductive rights and reproductive freedom. I mean, we actually had a talk about branding. I spoke to someone from ESPN, which you would never think has anything to do with our conversation, but they have an employee research resource group at ESPN that deals with queer and non-binary employees. But more importantly, we were talking about the brand, right? Because ESPN owned by Disney, also a brand, and people associate things with Disney, they associate things with ESPN. The brand is the thing you trust. So if you can brand LGBTQIA+ rights and freedoms in such a way that it feels good, the way that, like, I don't know, General Mills feels good, McDonald's feels good. Like if it can be done in the same, not cynically, I mean it could, but if that sort of mechanism exists where you can tell a story with a very simple message about LGBTQ rights and freedoms and personhood, then I think that's the route we lean into as designers and storytellers. We lean into that brand, whatever that's going to look like or looks like. We talked about the pride flag as a brand too, but we're on the fence as to whether that was a value, an actual, if that's a successful brand or not, right? Because it's of it, you can weigh in on that.
It absolutely was.
I think
it's shifted, and
Yeah, it's just an interesting question. I'm not one to speak one way or the other about it.
I'm kind of on the fence about it too. I think it's really useful, and I think I'm on the fence because living in typically more progressive or like more urban areas, I think it doesn't necessarily mean so much to me walking in businesses when there's a pride flag there. I know that I'm safe already, also with how I look, being white, being cis, being more feminine presenting. But understood. I think in different places like the South, maybe it means something really different.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So
cool.
let's continue. Yeah.
All right. So this one is for kind of a similar organization called Color Latina. So Colorado Organization for Reproductive Rights. They are a community-rooted nonprofit that works to enable Latinx individuals and their families to lead safe, healthy, self-determined lives. And this I'll go through just a little bit more quickly, going through 3 abortion stories from their community here. And so this is Gina. Oops, there we go. This is Gina and her kiddo. And I think, her story was just, I think a lot of these stories are really interesting because Gina, I think, is pretty deeply religious and Catholic, and really wanted that to be a part of her story. And I think a lot of these, I think oftentimes people break, don't engage with a faith question around abortion or around reproductive rights and health. And I think it absolutely is, within repro justice organizations, it absolutely is such a question. It is a sacred decision between you and your family and your doctor and your religious, or spiritual practice or leader. And this is Cynthia. And these stories were really focused a little bit more on healing and what that healing process looked like from, it can look really different for any given person. Some folks don't feel the need to have a healing process after an abortion, and some folks really do. And so I think we dove a little bit into, what did each person do to kind of process this and move past it, or what do they do to carry it with them if that's something that feels sacred and important to them. And this is Vic. And Vic currently cares for their mom as well. Yeah. So I would say, just about this, I would say something similar. And I do just want to name, I think, something about storytelling, especially when you're capturing folks' images and capturing portraits and capturing video and stories of people, even more so than design, but design as well. I think it's, me as a white person going into these communities that I don't belong to and having a camera, right, there's automatically a sort of a power dynamic there. I'm the one who's doing the editing. I'm the one who is asking the interview questions. And I think it's so important going forward as designers and storytellers to keep in mind that ultimately we, centering the folks with their stories who are the most impacted and really offer, I offer a platform for folks to jump onto, and they lead the conversation. They lead what the story is about. They lead, this is how I want my image to be portrayed, and this is who I am. And I think just that awareness, especially nowadays, is so key. Cool. Should we jump into Planned Parenthood?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. And also totally welcome questions here. I will say I'm a little bit limited on the visuals that I can share with y'all, just because we are in a little bit of as you can understand, the landscape that we're in right now is challenging. So our legal department has just totally locked us down. But
sure.
This rally I photographed, I'm an art director for Planned Parenthood. And so what I do is I do everything from when I can get my hands on a camera and when I can convince someone to send me to rallies to photograph. I absolutely love doing that. So that's these photos were from a rally. I think it was the May 14th rally, right after, if y'all remember, the Dobbs versus Jackson decision had been leaked. So that was the decision that overturned Roe the following couple of months last summer. And so, we're just seeing we're seeing probably the most energy from that leaked decision pre the overturn of Roe. So that's what this was from. And then also at Planned Parenthood, let's see, oh, that one won't play, it's just a little animation. I'm sure that some of you have probably seen some Bands Off things. And so Bands Off is our advocacy materials, and there are a ton of these. So if you go on our PP Act Instagram or just Planned Parenthood Instagram and want to take a look at some more, please feel free, and you'll see a whole row of these. And so a lot of the goals around our advocacy work is just to help people understand, okay, this is something that's being overturned, or this is a law that is happening right now. I think when Roe was overturned, that was huge to help folks understand how this would impact how this would impact them really at all. I think even now we're seeing a little bit of apathy towards it because a lot of folks live in, safe states. And, folks with means have always been and will to an extent always be able to access this care. And Roe to an extent was always the floor because folks who are, lived in poorer areas, lived in states that were, deserts for this care. BIPOC folks have always had more difficulty accessing this care or maybe weren't able to at all. So anyway, so I do a lot of that with my work. I work on the advocacy side and just, help oversee these campaigns. Let me see if I can click through. Here we go. And then also we do a ton of work on the health side, on the C3 side. And so we do a lot of work around trans healthcare. We offer healthcare for trans and we offer gender affirming care at our health centers. And we do a lot of education around pronouns, around what trans health is, what queer healthcare is, what sex education is for queer folks and other folks. And so these were for Transgender Awareness Week.
Just a quick question about those. So when you are working on these, like in terms of just bare bones design, like aesthetic choices, color palette, layout, the use of like form, like what are the typography, like what are some of the sort of conversations about that? Like what are you trying to get at when you guys talk about this?
Yeah, so a few different things, and we're actually in the midst of some heated conversations at the moment about what our social platforms should look like.
Okay.
But these we have a number of different observances that we follow each year, and so this, like I said, is for Transgender Awareness Week. I think we are moving away from this, thank goodness, but at the time we were working on, the trans flag is blue and pink. And I think, generally there's some movement away from that because it's just so gendered, but this was really recognizable at the time. And so, for Pride, we try to do something that is recognizable for Pride. For something like, Latinx Heritage Month, we work on. And I think the general process is, again, the stakeholders who are a part of those communities and who own the project kind of take the lead on having different focus groups and different brainstorm sessions. And we as creative people we're all creative people, but as parts of the creative team are a part of that process. And then we'll put together a couple different like tear sheets or look and feels based on, okay, this is how do you want your audience to feel? Who exactly are you targeting here? Are you targeting donors? Are you targeting members of that community? Are you targeting folks to are you targeting our base? Are you targeting folks who don't actually know much about abortion or trans healthcare? And I think based on who the audience is, we'll kind of shift the color palette, shift the tone.
Okay, okay, so that was interesting. So in other words, it's UI UX. You listen to the people who are in these populations that are the stakeholders. You work with them, you make you iterate designs, you get feedback from them. And then I would imagine, I think you and I talked about this in a prior conversation, because I have it written down that you said the LGBTQI plus community changes every 5 years or so. Like it's cyclical, right? So I was wondering if you could talk about that. Like you even were saying that perhaps you're going to move away from the color palettes here. So it's a moving target. Is that sort of would you agree with that? Like how to nail these demographics?
I would absolutely agree with that. I think it sometimes moves within months. I mean, this is only funny. I think this isn't funny, but this is a little insensitive, but it's coming from my dad, and I laughed and he meant it in a funny way. But he can't keep track of all of the letters that we keep adding. And so he's just like LGBTQ XYZ, LGBTQ ETC. And I'm like, haha, and that's dad jokes. But I think there is, the truth behind that is once we know better, we can do better. Right. And I think the more that we understand about the communities that we're serving and the communities that we're a part of, and the more gender has always been expansive, but the more that comes to public light, and even within our communities, the more we can frame messaging that actually fits the experiences of those people. And I keep coming back to that. The folks most impacted are the ones that are centered. And we did recently hear from folks. We have an ERG. It's a Pride ERG. It's at our employee resource group at our
Yes.
work. And so I think, we did a little focus group with those folks, and they came back and said, we're thinking we really, the flag, the pink and the blue feel too binary. It's not just a scale of masculine and feminine, there's like, it's a circle, it's a cycle, it's a sphere, it's a landscape, whatever you want to call it. And I think now that we know better, we can do better.
Yeah. And it just occurs to me too, that like, this is and it is hard because, and you could say it's because the LGBT community is in flux and has been for so long, but that's sort of like gaslighting to me, because it's only had to be in flux because of constant messaging, some heteronormative messaging, sometimes and often by law, right, for centuries, right, for at least in the modern world, right, and both in the US and I know in the UK until very recently, being gay was a crime. Right. And then that sparked the gay rights movement at Stonewall and et cetera, and how the policing of gay communities sort of led to the gay rights movement being very out and very and fighting back. Right. So it's like I feel like it's a little bit it's a little bit incorrect of us to frame it as maybe LGBTQIA plus community being a moving target, only because it's had to be. It's like anything that's hunted and attacked is going to have to move constantly. So without that system in place, like in other words, what I'm getting at is maybe one day we'll get to a point where we don't have to brand anything, right? Where we could be brandless or have one brand where we're all humans, right? That's like the hippie in me, right? It's like, that's the goal, like a sort of classless, structure that we live in, where we're all equal and we're all the same, and the distinctions are meaningless. Like that's the dream, but that isn't the reality, and it's not by choice. It's because of the design of a system that has been really just frankly draconian and brutal to people who don't fit or are somehow viewed as aberrant.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's changing. I do think it's changing. But right now, there's like so much pushback against it. We were talking about drag shows, in Tennessee, but this kind of anti-wokeism, whatever you want to call it, this culture war mishigas is like popping up in state legislatures. It's popping up in the House of Representatives. It's popping up out in the executive branch every 4 years or so, every now and then. Like it's been around and it's popping up in seats of power. Right. So it's a little bit more concerning than all that. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out. I just had that epiphany and I just wanted to.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I do think the feel is different. I think it is really different right now, especially with what's going on in Florida with some of the book burning. And it's not just LGBTQ communities. It's it's divided in so many different ways, and it's scary. I will also say that I don't think it's just I think sometimes queer communities can police each other. And I think there's this theory that I used to love. It's Gail Rubin and her circles of exclusion. If anybody wants to look it up, it's probably very outdated, and I'm not claiming to align with her on any, I don't know if she has any turfy views or anything like that. But the thing that I do like about her is her circles of exclusion talk about how, the inner circle is the one that's most accepted. So if you're white, if you're cis, if you're in a very specific looking monogamous relationship, you own your home, you have a white picket fence, right? And you're queer. Then we have going out and out and out. We have folks who are then poly. We have people of color. We have then, the kink community who's queer, and people are constantly stepping on one another to become more accepted by the mainstream. And so I don't know. That's just
I think that's what it is. It's like the locus of what's mainstream needs to change, I guess, is like kind of what I'm saying. I don't know, but there's a comment here, always being on the defensive is not a strong position for messaging, which I find to be a really good guidepost. So if you're trying to find a visual thread to describe this community or any community that's been marginalized, a defensive position, a one of attack may not be, or one of like counterattack may not be the most powerful. It might be what you were showing us in the beginning with the really intimate portraits of people with HIV. It isn't an attack at all. It's a very beautiful, blissful experience. Like the colors are gorgeous, the faces are smiling, they're placid and calm, and like that I think is a good position to start from, to have that conversation for sure.
Yeah,
So
I
that's
like that.
interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. I just think for the benefit of students who are trying to design messaging around LGBTQIA plus rights and concerns and challenges, that is like an interesting option to take, like this positive, you run the danger of being feel good and maybe gay washing, things like, like, but I take the point, like it makes sense to me, like that would be a stronger position. So
yeah.
Interesting.
Like
okay.
that. Yeah. I know we're running a little short on time. If you
That's my fault.
Well, if we want to pivot to anything, or if you want me to.
No, you just keep going. I mean, well,
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Cool. So this, I'll just, we don't have to talk about this too long, but this is sort of a graphic example of all that we have been talking about of storytelling from, the person most impacted, and how we change the narrative around abortion storytelling. And so this one I really loved: trans and non-binary folks deserve full access to abortion. And I think that's finally changing, right? We're finally seeing not just women, that language is expanding. But here we just, I collaborated with an artist. Her name is Eugenia Mello. She's incredible. And she drew these portraits based on photos that storytellers submitted of themselves. And we interviewed them and came up with these quotes. I've had an abortion. I'm 100% shameless. If I hadn't ended my non-viable pregnancy, I could have suffered serious health complications that made it impossible for me to conceive another child. And with these, again, we just hope that, someone taking a look at this who maybe is on the fence or just not totally sure how they feel about it, which is really fair to not know how you feel about it. And that's why we do this education around it and share these stories.
Yeah. Oh, wow. These are awesome.
I loved these. This was an illustrator that I worked with, Laura Breiling. She's based in Germany. And these were different folks that had abortions. And so, lots of different, I think oftentimes I'll just point out the middle one. We don't often hear the narrative of if you have an abortion, you can't possibly already be a parent, right? And that's not true. A lot of parents do go that route, and that is completely fine and completely and should be really normalized. And the reason I just shared these, this is another artist and illustrator, Canada Chapman, that we worked with, and this, I'll say, is all of these illustrations were an effort to revamp the teens section of our website. So, where teens go to learn about puberty, sex education, sexuality. And so we really just wanted imagery that could be hopefully relatable, and that where you could see and visualize a lot of different people, and that you could see yourself in those folks. And so we tried to get, a variety of gender expressions, a variety of sexualities, like not just showing thin white folks, which is so often what we see in a lot of this work. And so, and then.
Oh, these are so cool.
I loved these. And the period one I loved that one because we're moving away from this, thank goodness, but so often we're still seeing like Kotex blue blood in ads, and it's so ridiculous. And some people think, oh, that's graphic. Why does it matter to show it?
Yeah,
it does matter. And you look at the artist, Ruby Kaur, and she posted a photo of herself, and she had blood on her sheets, and it was a beautiful photo. It's a famous photo. and she got like hate mail and like death threats from around the world telling her she was disgusting, all these things. And I think as artists and designers, we have the power to make this stuff visible in a different way, and to say, obviously you're not, I mean, we're so past the point of being disgusting for bleeding, right? Like we're past that point, I think, culturally, but clearly not. And I think that's why a lot of this is actually like a form of resistance in a way, however subtle. And just for someone who's getting their period for the first time, whatever gender, I think it's just important. It's important to see, and maybe could give somebody a little bit of comfort.
Yeah, it kind of like, it gives me a pause for thought, like this idea of hiding the blood in ads and advertising material, that tells a story too, right? Like that's a story being told by the corporations or the advertising agencies that are trying to sell a product. How would you characterize that story? What is that story?
Of the hiding of the blood?
Yeah, like if we're showing blue liquids, what's the story there?
I think there's a message there that
that's a message.
Women don't, I don't know if it's women, or I should say people who get their periods, but the thing is, people who are messaging that aren't thinking what people who get their periods, they're thinking women, right? And so I do think a lot of this is gendered and connected to women. You know, it's dirty in a way. It's not natural. It's something to be, I think we get a lot of shame messages from that. A lot of messages like, you should not be talking about the bodily functions you have. I think a lot of that's connected to sex and pleasure as well. Any woman who is comfortable, or like femme person, I think, who's comfortable in their sexuality and in their body and like bleeding and not gonna have a meltdown about it, is I think a lot of folks maybe on the more conservative side would say, or would be afraid of that, is a woman to be feared, is a loose woman, right? And I think
that's the story there, that it's unclean, dirty. And that's a really terrible story to be telling a 12 or 13-year-old girl, or sometimes younger these days, that they're the thing that's fundamental about their bodies, that's different from, you know, people who have penises, is that they're is dirty and makes them unclean, as opposed to makes them a woman, makes them able to have children, or, you know, which is really the key indicator, right? Like that should be celebrated. And I think this goes back to our conversation about messaging and storytelling. That story, designers have a responsibility, I think, to tell that story in the way that we're talking about, which is that now you can have a child, now you can, you know, if you wanted to, and it's going to be okay. You're not a disgusting person, you're not less than in any way, you have powers that other humans don't, I guess would be a way to, you know, another way to phrase it,
right?
You know,
and it's just a part of your body. It's just it should be something that's normalized and
normalized.
yeah
Excellent. Okay. Wow. Okay.
So I loved these, and I
these
think
are great.
ultimately, like, what we're trying to do at Planned Parenthood is just, I can't believe I haven't said this yet, and we're 45 minutes into this, but show that these things are basic healthcare, right? Like abortion is basic healthcare, trans healthcare is basic healthcare, getting your period and whatever, it's basic healthcare, sex ed is basic healthcare. And I think those are messages that we don't hear. And if we saw it as that, it wouldn't be so deeply stigmatized, which is ultimately what causes the harm.
I don't want to interrupt anymore, but
no, you can interrupt.
Okay, I want you to be able to show everything you want to show.
Clicking along here.
Okay.
Oops, no, I'm stuck. I'll just, can breeze through Progress Now Colorado real quick. This was a golden era in my career, a short golden 3-year era. And Progress Now is a small organization. It's Colorado's largest and most effective multi-issue advocacy organization. So we worked with everyone from Keep Abortion Safe, which is Abortion Out Loud work, Soul to Soul and Color, who I showed you earlier. We worked with a lot of climate justice organizations. We launched a podcast called Hysterical Herstories, which is right up here. We did a lot of like pranks and billboards, and it was just a blast. And it was like, this probably did a ton for my career, because I had a director who basically said, okay, you want to rebrand? Figure it out, right? And I
Yeah.
didn't know what I was doing. I was a designer, and he basically gave me the keys to the kingdom and said, do whatever you want to do.
Wow.
And it was really fun.
Yeah.
And we got to do some pretty cool stuff. And so, you know, I
Kevin.
bring this up. I mean, some stuff we did was a little like, okay.
Yeah, I
But
love it. I love
talk
it.
about when you don't have an HR department or like
Yeah.
any sort of lawyers, and you're like, can do literally anything.
Carte blanche, as they say.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So opposite from Planned Parenthood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Had to get licenses for everything I showed you today. But you know, these guys also aren't under attack the same way PP is under attack.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just show this to show what design and creative direction can look like in a different organization, a totally different look and feel. I'll show you a video that we did for, oh no, and this one won't play. Oh, well.
Yeah, looks like there's a weird plug-in error.
Yeah, that's odd. Anyway, so this was a pretty cool organization to work for. And it was just such a gift to be able to be so deeply involved in Colorado state politics.
Could you go just really back quickly to this print?
Yeah.
Were those like, were they almost look like, I could see them as coasters you could like hand out at a party, but what those things in the bottom, are they ads? Like what would they have, where would they have appeared?
Oh, these guys, the No Means Kavanaugh. Well, obviously this was when the Kavanaugh hearings were coming out. These were all on our social channels. I think sometimes we launched.
Oh, okay, Instagram,
like Instagram, stuff like that. And so we kind of branded it, you know, the green and the red and color. I mean, we had so many more things like this, and then the top was just for our launch party and what our new logo could look like.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I can keep going. We can talk about politics, or I know we have 4 minutes, right?
Yeah, we have 4. Yeah, we have, like, why don't you show us one more thing, and maybe we can. Well, I guess here's one thing I want to ask. Right now, a judge in Texas is going to make a decision about an abortion pill, which is actually a way many abortions around the country are done with a series of 2 pills actually, and the one pill is very safe in terms of like the side effects and whatnot. But this one person could decide federally at the federal level that this pill should be revoked in terms of the FDA approval.
Yeah.
What is, I know, again, I don't know how much you can talk about this in the context of your job at Planned Parenthood, but this is just another issue which I could see something in parallel maybe happening the federal level, for example, with the gay marriage ruling at the Supreme Court, which was 2018, I think. When Dobbs is handed down, Clarence Thomas, one of the I think he now is the oldest or longest seated Supreme Court justice. He wrote a side opinion saying, hey, we should look at other stuff too in the same context as we looked at Dobbs. And one of those things is the gay marriage bill, the Griswold versus Connecticut, which is why we can all get birth control if we want it, et cetera. But if there is a federal judge somewhere that says, I am going to, we're going to take another look, somebody brings a case to a federal court about taking a look at gay marriage again, and it goes, say, to the federal level or the Supreme Court even, like what can a group like Planned Parenthood say? It's something similar, but for LGBTQ rights, could they do at that point? Like, from a design perspective, from a legal perspective, I mean, from a legal perspective, like we're seeing it play out right now. And it's like it's almost old news. Like I don't even want to hear it anymore. It's so disgusting. But from a design perspective, from a storytelling perspective, what would you recommend? Like if something like that were to happen, because it's a really good possibility that it will. You know, very high probability.
Yeah. I think, I mean, if folks are looking for a way to jump in and get involved, if something like that, I'll say when something like that happens, because I think it's kind of inevitable at this point, especially with the Mifepristone case that you're talking about. You know, I think what we need to do, I mean, there's a lot of ways to organize online. There's a lot of ways to hook up with groups locally and get and quickly design things to get out messaging to anyone from your immediate circle, your like immediate family members who maybe don't agree with it, and maybe you're able to show them a piece, whether that's like a video or a photo or a design of someone's story, or just information distilled in a way that they're not watching on Fox News, right? And so I think in that way we can work to design and share the information as we understand it from these organizations. I think I think going back, I'm not as familiar with this, but I think there's always been such a strong movement of zines. Like if, I know there's some things that are being talked about with freedom of the press. And that is sort of at some level of risk, or First Amendment rights are at some level of risk. And I think if that happens, journalism goes down, and where's our democracy, right? If you can't even get the news that, trans rights are being unrolled, where do we stand? And so I think if that happens, folks are going to be making underground papers, folks are going to be spreading information via zines. Which is so interesting, because if you look back in a gay and lesbian history, zines were actually in the 50s and the 60s. That was one of the primary ways that this messaging was done, that these conversations were had, were like underground zine. And I think it would actually be incredible to go back to that in some ways. And I'm wondering like what the social media TikTok age equivalent of a zine is, because like there's the zines that you go to the copy store and you make them yourself, that I did in the 90s, but then there's like the digital, highly transmissible and almost viral idea of what a zine is. It's it's people are self-publishing in one way or another. It's a zine, like we already have the technology to make a digital version of whatever that is. It would be interesting to see where that heads. And I think you're right that that's the way it's going to go. And that's where designers, especially freelancers, become like so much more important. Oh yeah. Because they hold the keys to that whole, that they hold the tools, like the means of production for how to have that conversation effectively. Exactly. I think so. And especially that combined with, your involvement in advocacy organizations and grassroots organizations and like politics to an extent, local politics. I think, there's a lot of skills that I think designers can offer and collaborate with. Yep. Yeah. This is great. Let's leave it there. That's a positive. Cool. That's a positive note. It is a positive note. We did it. We ended on a positive. I don't know how we did it. Ali, thank you so much for meeting with us today. We have to talk more and have you back at some other. There's other departments here, and there's women's studies. There, we could have other ways to bring you in and have conversations. So this should be really interesting. Thank you again, everybody. Thank you for coming. We'll see everybody here next Friday at the same time. Ali, have a good weekend. Everyone else have a good weekend as well. Thank you again. Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Bye. Of course. Bye-bye.